I will never forget that day. I was sitting in my corner of the classroom, trying to get lost in the lines of my notebook as if it were a refuge from the world outside. I've always been a shy person, the kind who prefers to observe rather than be noticed. But that day, everything changed. He walked into the room with that arrogant attitude, as always. The class bully, the type of person who made everyone shrink with just a look. I tried to ignore him, but it seemed like he had chosen me as his target. Without warning, he grabbed my notebook from my hands and tore out several pages right in front of everyone. My heart raced. The mix of shock, embarrassment, and anger froze me in place. I felt the world crumble around me. I heard laughter, whispers, some looked at me with pity, others just watched in silence. I wanted to disappear, to bury myself under the desk, but there was no escape. Every ripped piece of paper felt like it was taking a piece of me too. Hours later, when class ended and I was still trying to piece my notebook back together, he approached. My stomach dropped. What did he want now? Before I could say anything, he started speaking, and to my surprise, he was apologizing, in front of the entire class. I could feel all eyes on us. Every word he spoke seemed rehearsed, yet somehow genuine. My heart was still heavy, but a part of me felt something unexpected. Maybe he was truly sorry. Maybe that act of courage in front of everyone was more than just words. The silence in the classroom felt deafening as he spoke. Every word he said sounded strangely heavy, as if carrying years of wounded pride trying to be redeemed in seconds. I didn't know whether to believe him, whether this was just another scene to impress others, or if, finally, he was being sincere. As he continued, I noticed something different in his eyes. It wasn't just arrogance or superiority, it was vulnerability. For the first time, I realized that behind the bully facade, there was someone who also carried fears, insecurities, and perhaps, strangely enough, regrets. My chest felt tight and confused. I wanted to feel anger, but I also felt curiosity. The class remained completely silent. Some looked shocked, others were just wide-eyed. Even the teachers stopped looking at their papers and stared directly at us. That moment, which had started as complete humiliation, was turning into something I never imagined, a public display of courage, however small. He continued, saying he knew what he did was wrong and that there were no excuses for what he had caused me. Every sentence seemed like an internal battle for him, as if he were overcoming an old fear of facing the consequences of his own actions. I still felt pain for my notebook, for the ripped pages, but something inside me began to calm. Then, something unexpected happened. Some classmates started clapping. First timidly, then more confidently. It wasn't a celebration, but an acknowledgement that he had done something difficult, admitted his mistake. My heart raced, not for him, but for the strange sense of justice being restored, even if minimally. When he finally stepped away, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't decipher. There was still shame, there was still anger, but there was also a kind of silent respect. I realized that life sometimes teaches us lessons in ways we don't expect. Today I learned that courage isn't always physical, that apologizing can be harder than attacking, and that people can surprise you, even those you thought would never change. As I picked up the torn pages of my notebook, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't complete forgiveness, not yet, but there was space for something new, understanding, maybe even empathy. The class ended, and the room began to empty, but I stood there for a few seconds, watching the scene that had just unfolded, knowing that, somehow, my view of him, and of myself, had changed forever. In the days that followed, school never felt the same for me. Every hallway I walked through seemed to carry the weight of what had happened, and I noticed that everyone's gaze now followed me in a different way. Some looked curious, others with silent respect, and a few still with the same disdain as before. But something inside me had changed. I felt a new strength, timid at first, slowly growing. He changed too, not suddenly, not completely, but small gestures began to appear. No more cruel snickers, no more challenging looks when I passed by. He seemed to choose his words carefully when speaking to me, and sometimes even offered help, small things, but meaningful. It was strange to feel that kind of attention coming from him, but somehow it began to change the way I saw him. He was still the boy who had torn my notebook, but now there was a new layer, someone trying, clumsily perhaps, to become better. The class also reacted in unexpected ways. Some classmates who had previously ignored my words started including me more in conversations. Those who once looked at me with disdain now seemed to observe me with a different perspective. I realized that a single act of courage, no matter how small, can transform not only the person performing it but also those around them. I began to notice subtle changes in myself as well. I felt less afraid to speak up, less hesitant to share my thoughts. There was a quiet confidence forming, built not on arrogance but on the understanding that people could surprise you, that mistakes could be acknowledged, and that even bullies might have hidden depths. One afternoon, during a group activity, he approached me again. This time, he didn't have the eyes of a bully or the weight of guilt pressing down on him. He simply asked if I wanted to work together. I hesitated for a moment, old fears whispered to me, but I agreed. As we collaborated, something shifted. The tension between us, the awkwardness, began to dissolve. I could see a flicker of humor in his eyes, a lightness that had never been there before. Over time, I realized that this incident, so humiliating at first, had become a turning point. It had opened doors to new dynamics, new friendships, and a better understanding of human complexity. I learned that people are not just their worst moments, that pride and fear often hide deeper truths, and that reconciliation doesn't erase the past but can create something unexpected and valuable from it. Even now, as I walk through those same hallways, I feel a mixture of memories, the sting of humiliation, the weight of public apology, and the quiet triumph of seeing change happen before my eyes. I know that the torn pages of my notebook will never be fully restored, but the lessons they brought, the courage, empathy, and awareness, remain intact, written permanently in the story of who I am becoming. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of that day never fully left me, but something remarkable happened. The tension in the classroom began to transform into a strange kind of rhythm, almost like an unspoken truce. The boy who had once torn my notebook became a figure I could observe without fear, and in some moments, even curiosity replaced my lingering resentment. Our interaction slowly evolved. At first, it was small gestures, holding the door open, offering a pencil when I forgot mine, a brief nod across the room. But over time, those small gestures became conversations. Tentative at first, awkward and hesitant, yet gradually, genuine. We discovered shared interests, shared jokes, and even shared moments of vulnerability. I realized that beneath his rough exterior, he had layers of thoughtfulness and humor I had never expected. And I began to see my own layers more clearly too. The courage that had sparked within me during that confrontation was growing, shaping me in ways I hadn't imagined. The classroom itself became a different space. Classmates who once whispered and laughed now seemed to watch with subtle anticipation when we interacted. Not in judgment, but in recognition of the shifts happening before their eyes. Some started treating me with more respect, others, quietly, reflected on their own actions. I realized how contagious accountability and humility could be, even among teenagers who often seemed immune to lessons. Outside of class, things began to ripple further. Our group projects became easier, filled with cooperation rather than competition. He began apologizing to others he had teased or bullied before, and it was fascinating, frightening even, how one act of courage, witnessed and recognized, could inspire a chain reaction. For the first time, I saw him not just as the boy who had hurt me, but as someone capable of growth, of change, and maybe even kindness. Yet, the journey wasn't without difficulty. Old memories lingered, and I found myself questioning motives, rereading every word, every action for hidden meanings. I was learning that trust doesn't appear overnight, it grows slowly, carefully, and sometimes painfully. Each interaction carried the weight of past wrongs, but also the promise of potential understanding. One day, during a particularly challenging assignment, he made a comment that caught me off guard. "I never realize how much courage it takes to stand quietly, to just keep going," he said softly. His words weren't directed at me alone, they seemed almost to himself, but they struck me deeply. In that moment, I realized that the roles we play, even as victims or bullies, are more complex than they appear. Strength and vulnerability exist side by side, and true growth emerges when both are acknowledged. By the end of that semester, I was no longer the same girl who had sat silently in the corner, afraid to draw attention. I had learned lessons far beyond academics: empathy, patience, resilience, and the subtle power of forgiveness. He, too, had changed, though imperfectly, and yet the transformation was undeniable. Together, in that small classroom, we had stumbled into a new understanding, one forged in conflict, apology, and the fragile, yet enduring, human capacity to evolve. And as I sit here now, months later, flipping through the repaired pages of that same notebook, I realize something profound: life doesn't always give second chances. But when it does, when apologies are offered and acknowledged, when courage meets accountability, the results can reshape not just individuals, but entire communities, even a classroom filled with whispers, judgment, and expectation. The torn pages will never be perfect, but neither are the lessons. They are real, they are lasting, and they are mine. As the months passed, the ripple effects of that single moment became more apparent. What had started as a humiliating incident gradually shaped the rhythm of my school life, transforming it in ways I could never have predicted. I noticed subtle shifts in how I carried myself, less hesitation in my voice, more confidence in my posture, a quiet courage that had once seemed impossible for me to summon. It wasn't just a change in behavior, it was a deep, internal shift in how I saw myself and my place in the world. He continued to change as well, though not in a linear, predictable way. There were still moments when old habits surfaced, snide remarks, small acts of teasing, but they became increasingly rare, and each time they appeared, they were followed by a hesitation, a self-correction. I began to realize that people don't change overnight, that transformation is often messy, uneven, and painfully gradual. Yet, even in the messiness, there was growth. He learned to face consequences, to speak honestly, to acknowledge his actions without deflecting blame. I watched this evolution unfold, and in some strange, unexpected way, it inspired me to continue evolving too. The classroom itself became a microcosm of change. Other students, witnessing his public apology and ongoing efforts to improve, began reflecting on their own behavior. Cliques softened, whispers turned into conversation, and a sense of shared accountability emerged. I began to understand something profound. Courage and vulnerability are contagious, even in a place where judgment and ridicule once ruled. Small acts, an apology, a kind word, a willingness to change, can ripple outward, affecting people far beyond the immediate moment. Outside of class, our interactions became more natural, though always under careful observation by our peers. We learned to collaborate without tension, to joke without cruelty, to support each other when challenges arose. In these moments, I began to see him not as the boy who had hurt me, but as a person navigating his own struggles, learning, failing, and trying again. It was a lesson in empathy I had never fully understood before. Yet, growth is rarely simple or linear. I still wrestled with lingering resentment, moments when old fears resurfaced and whispered that perhaps he hadn't truly changed. But I also realized that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about choosing to move forward, carrying the lessons with you. I learned to separate the action from the person, to recognize that mistakes can coexist with genuine attempts at change. By the end of the school year, the transformation felt almost surreal. The once tense hallways were now spaces where collaboration, mutual respect, and understanding were possible. I noticed other students approaching him, seeking guidance or conversation, rather than avoiding him in fear. And through it all, I observed my own evolution, not just as someone who had survived humiliation, but as someone capable of reflection, compassion, and resilience. Looking back, I realized that the torn pages of my notebook were only the beginning. They symbolized a rupture, a moment of conflict that forced both of us to confront our shortcomings. From that rupture grew a series of lessons: the power of courage, the necessity of accountability, the value of empathy, and the fragile, yet transformative, nature of forgiveness. Each day, each interaction, added another layer to my understanding of human complexity. And now, as I prepare for the next chapter of my life, I carry these lessons with me. I know that challenges will arise, that people will disappoint, and that mistakes, mine and others, will continue to shape my journey. But I also know that growth is possible, that change can ripple outward in ways we cannot always anticipate, and that even the most painful moments can give rise to unexpected strength, understanding, and connection. The torn pages remain, a constant reminder of the day everything shifted. But what matters most is what I have written on the pages of my own life since then: the courage to stand, the empathy to understand, and the awareness that even the smallest acts of accountability can change the world around you. Years passed, and yet the memory of that day, so small in its appearance, yet monumental in its impact, remained etched in my mind. What began as a moment of humiliation had become a turning point that shaped my perspective on human behavior, relationships, and resilience. I came to understand that the world is not divided simply into bullies and victims, right and wrong, but is composed of individuals navigating complex emotions, fears, and choices. He and I continued to cross paths over time. The awkwardness that once defined our interactions faded into a cautious familiarity. We weren't friends in the traditional sense, but there was a mutual respect born from shared experience. He had learned lessons that were not just about apology, but about awareness, how his actions affected others, how pride could blind him, and how courage could manifest not just in confrontation, but in humility and self-reflection. Observing him change was a constant reminder that human behavior is fluid, capable of transformation when met with accountability and intention. I noticed the changes in myself even more profoundly. I had grown from the shy, timid girl who hid in the corners into someone capable of asserting herself, speaking up, and embracing her own worth. That transformation wasn't instantaneous, it unfolded in small steps, fueled by courage, observation, and the realization that I could influence my own narrative. I learned that resilience is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it, and that understanding others' struggles does not diminish your own voice, it strengthens it. The classroom, once a battlefield of whispers and ridicule, became a living laboratory of human growth. I witnessed students supporting one another in ways I had never imagined, lending a hand when someone faltered, speaking up for a peer, and offering forgiveness when conflict arose. I saw how one act of vulnerability, the public apology, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing, could catalyze a culture shift. The lessons extended beyond our immediate circle, echoing in subtle ways that transformed group dynamics, cooperation, and empathy. As time went on, I reflected often on the torn notebook. Those pages were more than paper, they were symbols of fragility and resilience, of mistakes and learning. Each time I revisited them, I understood more clearly that the pain of the past does not vanish, but it can become the foundation for growth. I realized that accountability, empathy, and forgiveness are not abstract virtues but practical tools for navigating the complexities of life. Looking back over the years, I saw the long-term effects of that one incident. Friendships deepened because people began to understand that mistakes do not define a person, they are opportunities for reflection and improvement. Conflicts became less about winning and more about communication. And I carried forward a profound understanding of human complexity. The capacity for cruelty exists alongside the capacity for kindness, just as fear can coexist with courage. In quiet moments, I sometimes wondered what might have happened if he had never apologized. Would I have remained trapped in my own fears, shrinking in the corners of classrooms, avoiding confrontation? Would the ripple effect of empathy, courage, and accountability ever have taken hold in the environment around me? Those questions reminded me of the fragile power of choice, how one moment, one action, one decision, can reverberate through years of life, shaping people, relationships, and communities in ways that are impossible to predict. Now, as I prepare for new chapters, new challenges, and new relationships, I carry this knowledge with me. I know that mistakes will continue, both mine and others, but I also know that apology, reflection, and courage have the power to transform, not just individual lives, but the culture surrounding us. The torn pages of my notebook remain a symbol, not of pain alone, but of growth, resilience, and the enduring possibility that even the most difficult experiences can shape us into stronger, wiser, and more compassionate people. Ultimately, I learned that life's most significant lessons often come from moments of vulnerability and conflict, from the courage to face wrongs and the willingness to accept change. And perhaps, more than anything, I learned that the smallest gestures, an apology, a kind word, an honest acknowledgement, can echo across time, shaping not just our own story, but the lives of everyone around us. The torn notebook is still with me, and every page tells a story of mistakes, of courage, of growth, and of the extraordinary ways ordinary people can change, transform, and inspire. As high school progressed and I moved through the final years, the echoes of that day never truly faded. What began as a single, painful incident had become a quiet foundation for my understanding of human behavior, resilience, and empathy. Every hallway, every classroom, every small interaction seemed subtly influenced by the lessons learned that day, the lessons of accountability, courage, and the unpredictable power of human transformation. He and I continued to interact in ways that were no longer defined by fear or resentment. Our relationship, complicated as it was, became a silent testament to growth. He still had flaws, moments when old patterns crept back in, but I had learned not to define him, or anyone, by a single mistake. I watched him navigate the complexities of adolescence with a growing awareness, and in doing so, I learned even more about patience, understanding, and the layers beneath human behavior. My own transformation continued, expanding beyond the classroom. The courage I had found within myself that day became a guiding force in all areas of life. I learned to speak in meetings and group projects, to advocate for myself and others, and to confront situations that would have once terrified me. That small spark of confidence, born from surviving humiliation and witnessing accountability, had grown into a steady flame. It shaped friendships, influenced how I handled conflict, and gave me a framework for understanding people in ways I had never imagined. The impact on the broader social environment was subtle but profound. The culture of our school shifted gradually as others observed the dynamics between him and me. Students began to take responsibility for their actions, conflicts were approached with dialogue rather than aggression, and empathy started to become more visible even among those who had previously seemed immune to it. I realized that transformation is rarely dramatic, it is often quiet, incremental, and cumulative. Yet the ripples of a single courageous act can extend far beyond its original context. Outside the classroom, I carried these lessons into other parts of my life. I noticed that people respond not only to actions but also to authenticity. When someone apologizes sincerely, when someone takes responsibility for their mistakes, it changes the dynamic in a way that commands respect and trust. I learned to observe human behavior with a nuanced eye, recognizing that both cruelty and kindness often coexist in the same person, and that true growth involves embracing that complexity rather than denying it. Reflecting on the torn notebook, I understood that it was never just a notebook. It was a mirror of human imperfection and a canvas for transformation. Each torn page symbolized the fragility of trust, the pain of wrongdoing, and the possibility of redemption. Each repaired page represented resilience, courage, and the profound impact of acknowledgement and forgiveness. The notebook had become a metaphor for life itself, messy, unpredictable, and deeply transformative when approached with reflection and intention. As graduation approached, I looked around the classroom with a sense of quiet reverence. The boy who had once been my tormentor had become a living reminder that people can change, even in small ways, and that these changes matter. I had grown in ways that were impossible to measure, emotionally, socially, and morally. I had learned to navigate conflict, to embrace vulnerability, and to recognize that empathy and courage are not weaknesses, they are strengths that shape lives, relationships, and communities. Even years later, when I think back on that day, I understand the magnitude of its impact. A torn notebook, a public apology, and the courage to confront wrongdoing, these were not merely isolated events. They were catalysts for growth that shaped who I became, a person capable of resilience, understanding, and meaningful connection. Life continued to challenge me, as it always will, but I faced those challenges with the knowledge that mistakes, apologies, and small acts of courage can create ripples that last far longer than the moment itself. Ultimately, that day taught me a lesson that transcends adolescence. People are not defined by their worst actions, nor are they incapable of growth. And I am not defined by my fears, nor limited by the cruelty I have endured. The torn pages remain, a permanent reminder of pain, courage, and transformation. Yet more than that, they are a testament to the enduring possibility that even ordinary people, through courage, empathy, and reflection, can change themselves, and, quietly, the world around them.